Welcome to Lecture 6. This is part 3 of the lecture series on Beowulf. Here we're going to focus on Beowulf as king and defender. And we're looking at the so-called second part of the poem. In your text, the second part of the poem begins on page 80, line 1799. The so-called second part of the poem never gets as much attention as the first part of the poem. One wonders why. First of all, there are time sequence issues. We're going to find very quickly, Beowulf returns home, a period of time passes, Heloc, his military retainer, gets killed, a cup gets stolen from Beowulf's barrow, and then we have this experience of reflecting back before the time when Beowulf was made king by Ongentheow and the Swedes. So we've got a lot of chaotic stuff. I think one of the things to note is that periods of chaos are connected either with death or theft. You might think of this as almost a sort of pre-modern literary device that we might call something like now stream of consciousness. That is, one idea brings up another, which is much separated in time chronologically, but they are emotionally related together. I don't want you to worry about that when you read the second part of the poem. It is a little challenging in the sense of there's this back and forth, and I think it is purely the purpose of the poet to show the kind of chaos in the land of the Yats. We were in the land of the Danes in part 1, we're in the land of the Yats in part 2. Beowulf's final conquest is against a fire-breathing dragon. Now this dragon is very different than any of the others. It is a guard for a hoard of gold. Gold that, by the way, it did not amass and it does not share. You see the theme? The sharing of things is important as an ethical principle of life in the poem. The dragon doesn't share. When a cup gets stolen, it, in a very avaricious way, gets mad and starts burning down the countryside, even burns down Beowulf's own mead hall. Beowulf wonders if indeed there has been some sin in his life, a sin against the old law, he says, that has brought on the coming of the dragon. Hard to say. One thing is clear. The dragon represents Beowulf's final challenge. Critics question whether or not he's successful or whether he is not. Beowulf certainly, with the help of Wiglaf, will defeat the dragon, but he also dies at the same time. A particular form of literary criticism applied to Beowulf in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, 70s tended to favor the idea that Beowulf was guilty of pride. Based on looking at that sermon that we looked at in the previous lecture, connected with what happens when people want more and more and more and more, and their systems of value are compromised in understanding. That's probably an overreading of the situation at the end, but I do want to keep that one out there as a possibility that some people have noted. That Beowulf fights, finally, avarice, greed, is probably not insignificant. Beowulf's final speech is one I want to look at in some detail, and it begins at line 2729. 2729 on page 99 of our text. 2729. Beowulf is preparing to die. His sword, Naegling. Notice, by the way, that swords in this poem are even personified. They're given names. But this is a world that is very tough on swords. They often don't last, or they're ineffective. Maybe says something about the poet's own ethic, about the nature of war. I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute. Now is the time when I would have wanted to bestow this armor on my son, had it been my fortune to have fathered an heir and live on in his flesh. For 50 years I ruled this nation, No king of any neighboring clan would dare face me with troops. None had the power to intimidate me. I took what came, cared for and stood by things in my keeping, never fomented quarrels, never swore to a lie. All this consoles me, doomed as I am, and sickened to death, because of my right ways. The ruler of mankind need never blame me when the breath leaves my body for murder of kinsmen. Go now quickly, dearest Wiglaf, under the gray stone where the dragon is laid out, lost to its treasure. Hurry to feast your eyes on the hoard. And of course he wants him to bring some back. Beowulf's final speech occurs at line 2794, further down that page of 100, 2794. To the everlasting Lord of all, to the King of glory, I give thanks, that I behold this treasure here in front of me, that I have been allowed to leave my people, so well endowed on the day I die. Now that I have bartered my last breath to own this fortune, it is up to you to look after their needs. I can hold out no longer. Order my troop to construct a barrow on the headland of the coast after my pyre has cooled. It will loom on the horizon at Hrothnes and will be a reminder among my people, so that in coming times crews under sail will call it Beowulf's Barrow as they steer ships across the wide and shrouded waters. Notice Beowulf gives thanks for the accomplishment that he has made. The interesting thing is here that he sees this less as an accomplishment for himself than it is for his people. If there is pride here, and I think there certainly is a level of pride without question, I think it is pride for his accomplishment, not for himself, but for his people. This is probably, in many ways, exactly the way Beowulf would have chosen to go out. Old English literature is not fond of old age. Beowulf would not have wanted to have continued to rule until he was unable to act. But this raises also an interesting question. How old is Beowulf in the poem? Because Beowulf has been king for 50 years in the second portion of the poem. If we figure that Beowulf is in his 20s, or perhaps early 30s in the first part of the poem, we have a senior citizen indeed. So indeed, even for this time period, we've got someone who is probably not realistic in representation. I've always said in a kind of joking way that there's probably many a person who would profit at a senior citizen center in America having read Beowulf, because as a senior citizen, Beowulf has still got it. So what happens now? There's potential war. Wiglaf and an unknown woman at the end of the poem lament the demise of the Yats. Perhaps they will become prisoners to others. Perhaps there will be other kinds of violence against the people. The singing woman at the end is particularly aware of that. Beowulf is praised. And let's look at those concluding lines of the poem. On 108, line 3166 to 82. Beowulf's barrow has been created, and now he is being buried. They let the ground keep that ancestral treasure, gold under gravel, gone to earth, as useless to men now as it ever was. Then 12 warriors rode around the tomb, chieftains' sons, champions in battle, all of them distraught, chanting in dirges, mourning his loss as a man and a king. They extolled his heroic nature and exploits, and gave thanks for his greatness, which was the proper thing, for a man should praise a prince whom he holds dear and cherish his memory when that moment comes when he has to be conveyed from his bodily home. So the Yat people, his hearth companions, sorrowed for the Lord who had been laid low. They said that of all the kings upon earth, he was the man most gracious and fair-minded, kindest to his people, and keenest to win fame. Note the superlatives. John Niles, a critic of the poem, once observed that there's a fatal contradiction at the heart of the poem. That is, the people need a good leader, while the leader wants to establish everlasting fame for himself. Again, the public versus the private. As we reach the end of Beowulf, we see that indeed Beowulf has probably done what he could to have ruled successfully for 50 years, to have kept war to a minimum in a society where war is very much the order of the day, to have avoided some of the chief taboos of his day as well in being a good ruler, is significant in and of itself. Perhaps at the end of the day, that's really all that anybody can do.